Okay, all right. We're live. We're letting people in. I'll
Welcome. Come on in.
Give everyone a chance to enter the virtual room. Welcome to Powerhouse's virtual events. My name is Chris. I'm the events coordinator. And tonight we are very pleased to be hosting the launch of Poison for Breakfast by Lemony Snicket, as represented here by Daniel Handler. He'll be in conversation with Goldberg, and you can buy copies of the book at powerhousebookstores.com. The link is in the event page and posted now in the chat. Each one will include one of these unique notarized and signed book plates that you can put in your copy, or that will be in your copy. And if you have any questions, you can use in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and they will take your questions at the end of the event. And I'll introduce our guests now. Margot Goldberg is a best-selling novelist. His books have been named finalists for the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Carnegie Medal, and the NYPL Young Lions Award. She writes and teaches in Brooklyn.
Woo.
Lemony Snicket is the author of far too many books, including the 4-volume All the Wrong Questions and the 13-volume A Series of Unfortunate Events. When inconvenience or treachery prohibits him from making an appearance, Mr. Snicket is represented, as he is here, by Daniel Handler, author of 7 unnerving novels himself. And I'll hand it over now.
Well, I'm going to call you Mr. Snicket, because that's
all right.
I think.
I will call you Ms. Goldberg.
I love that. Call me Ms. Goldberg.
You don't have an honorary doctorate, do you?
As of right now, how about, I would love to be my father's doctor. Actually, I'm the only, my sister and my father are both doctors. So if just tonight I could be Dr. Goldberg, that would be.
Wait for an honorary doctorate just so I can say, actually, it's Dr. Hamler.
Yeah, anyway. So I was thinking, and you can veto this, I would love to hear you read just a little teeny bit maybe of this book.
All right.
And we can chat.
Okay, yes. Hello, everyone. I can't see you. I don't know if you're there really, but I'm going to pretend that you are, as I often do here in my office. I pretend that someone is listening. My name is Daniel Hamler. I have represented Lemony Snicket for more than 20 years, and this is the new book, Poison for Breakfast. It looks like this. I'm tilting it so the pretty gold Lemony Snicket can catch the light, depending on where you're standing or where my light source is. I'll read a little bit from the middle of the book, and then I'll talk to Ms. Goldberg, my pal, who's generously, standing in front of a Zoom camera for the umpteenth time since the end times began.
Sitting, but that's okay. We'll call it standing.
It's a metaphoric standing. Yeah, she's short, but she's not that short, I guess is what she's trying to say.
Yeah.
It is said there are 3 rules for writing a book. The first rule is to regularly add the element of surprise. And I have never found this to be a difficult rule to follow, because life has so many surprises that the only real surprise in life is when nothing surprising happens. Perhaps you were surprised to read at the end of the previous chapter that I jumped into the cold and swirling water, which means I managed to follow the first rule of writing a book. But truth be told, I was just as surprised to find myself plunging into the sea. It was the sort of decision you make so quickly, it does not even feel like you were deciding, just that you have already decided. One moment I was standing on the rock, thinking of how if I were poisoned, I might not have many more chances to swim here at this particular spot, and the next I was in the water. The second rule is to leave out certain things in the story. This rule is trickier to learn than the first, because while life is full of surprises, you can't leave any other part of life out. Everything that happens to you. Often boring, sometimes exhausting, and occasionally thrilling. Every moment of life is unskippable. In a book, however, you can skip past any part you do not like, which is why all decent authors try not to have any of these parts in the book they write, but few authors manage it. Nearly every book has at least one part that sits on the page like a wet sock on the ground, with the reader stopping to look at it thinking, what is that doing here? This is why I left out the part where I removed most of my clothes before jumping into the sea, because no sensible reader is interested in things of that nature. If Little Red Riding Hood, the hero of an old folktale, needed to use the bathroom while walking through the forest to see her grandmother, that is her business. which is why just about all of the books about her leave out that part. If Oedipus, the hero of a famous play, had an itch he couldn't scratch and it really bothered him, that is not something we necessarily want to read about. So it should happen off stage where we won't even hear about it. And I can't find a good reason to tell you exactly what I was wearing, or if it required unbuckling or unbuttoning, or if I folded things neatly or just dropped them in a heap on the rocks by the shore. So I have followed the second rule of writing a book and left it out. Nobody knows the third rule.
So I have to say that I now blame you for, I'm always going to think of Little Red Riding Hood going to the bathroom. Like, I have spent the first 49 years of my life never thinking about the things she was also doing that I never read about. And now I'm infected with all the things she was doing, you know, off camera that whole time.
That's kind of interesting because I feel like that's one of my first questions when I learn I'm going to go to the woods. Like, am I going for a little bit? Is there a bathroom when we arrive? Where is the bathroom? I want to know everything. And then I'm okay with various bathroom situations, but that is, you have to ask it subtly, because if someone says, hey, do you want to go to the woods? You can't immediately say, oh, is there a bathroom? But it's one of the things that is most pressing on my mind.
That's interesting. It's never bothered me, I guess, personally. I'm good to go, so.
That's interesting. I think that I would have a bodily advantage over you, but we can talk about that later.
Exactly. That's why it's a little bit, yeah, it's reversed. So congratulations on the newest Snicket opus.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a nice day to have it go out into the world. I don't know how the weather is in Brooklyn, but out here it feels light and breezy, and just the time for a book to just arrive quietly on your shelf.
And it's so handsome. I love books that are small. It's like, you can, like, you know, you can cradle it in your hands. I feel like
I do too.
All Japanese books are always small like this. Like, they like things small, but like usually, so that was nice when it got small. So I guess I'm gonna ask some questions, and I'm really hoping that the folks that are joining us today have questions, because I know my favorite thing when I get to, you know, be at a book event is hearing what the readers, you know, want to know and kind of including them in the conversation. But I guess to start, one thing that really struck me reading this book is that Poison for Breakfast is less a book about what happens to Mr. Snicket than what he thinks about and observes as it happens, which is to say, it's a much less eventful book than the Unfortunate Event books, because honestly, most of our lives are quite fortunately not as eventful as the lives of the Baudelaires.
Yeah, I mean, one would hope.
Yes, one would. But the cool thing about this book is it seems to be pointing out that a life doesn't have to be full of big dramatic events to be exciting. If you happen to be a person who notices and thinks about things, which is the sort of person that Mr. Snicket happens to be. So I guess my first question is, do you think keen observers and thinkers are born, or are they made? And do you think that you were always this way, or do you think you became this way somehow? And if you became this way somehow, how do you think that happened?
I think, frankly, that most people have it beaten out of them. I think when you're a child, all you're doing is noticing. I mean, when you're a very little child, which some people claim to remember, I don't remember when I was very, very little, like a baby. But when you have a baby, you've had a couple of babies. I've had a baby, and then there's all the satellite babies we have in our lives. You see them noticing things. You see them trying to hold something, trying to look at something. We're just staring at something in contemplation. And then when you're a young child, you begin to notice things that other people are kind of yanking you away from, right? You want to look at something and it's time to go. You got to put your shoes on, you got to put your coat on, you got to get out of the car, you got to get into the car. Whatever it is that you're looking at, you're told is not important. And I think for a lot of us, we take that rule to heart. We learn that it's not important what we're noticing. And then it's, you know, whatever people are saying is important instead, we decide it's important instead. And so we get it kind of beaten out of us. But I think if you're lucky somehow to survive the juggernaut of the adult world informing you that what you're interested in is not interesting, then I think you can be blessed to lead a life of fascinated observation.
So do you think that you made a very conscious decision? Because I mean, the way that you're talking, I phrased it differently in my mind growing up, but I definitely got to a point where I was like, oh, grown-ups are really boring, and I don't ever want to be boring. So I'm going to be a different kind of grown-up. And like, I remember at a young age, like youngish age, like saying, you know, I don't want to be like most of the grownups I see around me. And I think it is tied to exactly what you're saying about still being observant and just allowing yourself to look at stuff. So I guess I'm curious if for you, was it a conscious decision to buck that, to not let it get beaten out of you? Or do you think just there was something innate in you that like allowed you to dodge it?
Well, I mean, I'm always nervous about innate. The word innate always seems a little terrifying, particularly for people of my culture and your culture, I think. But I was a very spacey child. So I think when people were telling me that I shouldn't be paying attention to what I was paying attention to, and that something else was more important, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear it maybe 70% of the time. And so I think that saved me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in some way that continues to save me, that my brain floats off to think about something other than what I'm being told to think about. And it makes for a very gratifying life, I don't mind saying. But yes, I agree that your inner life when you're a child, because you often have no other choice, because you don't, unless you're being forced to work in a factory or other things that children are made to do, you have a lot of time and not a lot of pressure to do what it is. And so your brain kind of wanders around. But I don't know. I mean, somebody said to me once that I always end up talking to the children at a party. And then I became more aware of whether that was really true or not. And then I was at this party and I got there and it was like horrifically boring, you know, the like a stab you in the stomach kind of boring. And I just remember I was walking through the party and there was all this like real estate talk and like traffic talk. And I was just like, oh. And then I got out to the backyard just because I walked all the way through the house where the party was. And I stood on the backyard and there was a child there. And I said like, oh, hey, what's up? And the child said, last night I dreamed I was a horse. And I thought, oh, I don't think I like talking to children necessarily. I think I just like interesting conversation. And that this child was like, if you want to know what's up, I will tell you what's up. I got something that's up. And just if if at the front door, the hostess said, hi there, last night I dreamed I was a horse, I never would have met this kid. But I think that there was something about him still being said of maybe you should just say your dream out loud. Try that, see if that works this conversation. And that had been, of course, frightened out of the rest of us. So it was a pretty good conversation.
That's cool. Yeah, and it's not even, I mean, it's not even that that child said that because they thought it would be a good idea. Like that filter isn't there. Like, it's just, this is what's in my head, so I'm going to tell you what's in my head right now. Like, yeah,
and no one had said that's not a way to start a conversation. Right. Perhaps you should mention the weather to the nice man.
Or sports.
Yeah. That's right.
Yes.
How are those Dodgers? I can't even fake sports talk.
Yeah. I can't either. And I guess, and that was in the book, there's a, you bring up, what came first, the chicken or the egg, and it kind of made me, that was kind of, so that question at first was kind of the first of my sort of chicken or egg questions, because I have another one.
Okay.
Similar, but a different flavor.
I like it.
To say, like, so in addition to this book just being about what you're thinking about and observing as you're going through your day, it's also very much a book about reading and writing. That part you read, very, kind of epitomizes, like, kind of the concerns of that book. And so what I'm interested in is sort of, not all readers are writers, definitely not. And while I think all and while I think all writers should be readers, I'm not sure all of them are. No. And so I kind of want to talk about the whole reader-writer thing. And this is, again, is sort of an origin story. Like, do you think you started out as a reader who progressed into a writer? Do you think you always sort of had both in you? And if you didn't always have both in you, how did the writing, if you were a reader first, where did writing come from out of that? Or did it come from somewhere totally different?
For me, they were the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember a time when I didn't want to be a writer. My parents have told of a time when I was very little that I was asked what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I said that I wanted to be an old man who lived on top of a mountain giving advice. I don't know if that story is true. My parents are unreliable, but if that's true, that's the only other thing I wanted to be. I always wanted to be a writer. I was reading at a very young age, and I don't know who told me, of course, that how closely writing and reading are linked, but I wanted to participate in that. I wanted to be part of what books were. I had a great library that I went to a lot, and the library had writing classes when I was very little. I met a number of authors, including Marilyn Sachs, who was a children's writer, and she took me very seriously. I told her I wanted to be a writer, and I remember that she sat down with me and asked me what I thought the hardest part of the job was. Because she gave me a choice: is the hardest part of the job the beginning, middle, or end of the story? And I said it was the middle. I don't know if that's really the hardest part, or anyway, I don't know if it's the hardest part for me anymore, but I thought that was a good question for her to ask me. And good, but yeah, I always wanted to, it was always the same thing to me, kind of, and just to participate in literature. And so, I mean, crazily, I got to participate in a way that was kind of beyond any dream of participating. But I think no matter what, I would have stayed with literature. I think I would have stayed in it in some way. And I like to think of myself as it kind of excites me most when I think about participating in a literary tradition. Not a specific literary tradition necessarily, but just kind of when I think about, for a long time, people have been thinking about what they want to write down, and then they write it down, and then someone else reads it. And in this way, it is the, it's kind of distilled conversation. It's not a hot take, right? It's not like an exclamation or a impulsive conversation. All those things can be fun too, but there's something about it that there was a little contemplation, no matter how goofy or shallow even the writing is, that it's part of a literary tradition of thinking about something and then writing it down. That seems really important to me.
So then what is the hardest part for you? The beginning, the middle, or the end?
Maybe the beginning, I don't know. I do, when I'm thinking about a book, including when I was thinking about this one, I call it research because I don't know another word for it, but it's not really recognizable as a research, and anyone who does proper research would really look askance at me. But I make a pile of books that I think have something to do with what I'm thinking about. I go find some other books, and I spend a lot of time reading them and taking notes and just kind of trying to figure out what it is exactly that I'm thinking about. And then I've gotten pretty good at it, but I try to begin now impulsively. I say to myself, okay, there's 3 more books to read, you have some notes, and I say, nope, start right now, because that helps me. Because otherwise, you can go on with that phase for a long time. And even as people who do actual research do, right? People who work on these biographies for like 25 years, because somebody says, oh no, that one Tuesday she spent in this small town. It's like, oh, I better go to that town and see if she left behind any scrap of material. And so I do whatever the fictional equivalent of that is sometimes. So I think starting, and it's always so much easier, like having a bad first draft or even having like one crappy sentence to me is so much easier than having nothing. Way easier.
Right.
How about you? What's the hardest part for you?
Not starting, like, I mean, because maybe ends. I want to make sure an end. Yeah, I'm gonna go with ends here.
All right, great.
Because usually I've started because something came to me and I'm excited about it, and so like I already have momentum and ideas,
right.
And maybe I have to do work to get it to be in the way I want it to be, but that it's there already, and so then. Yeah, it's about making sure it comes to something that's going to be, Oh, and I'd like to point out that I think you've, whether or not you're aware of it, you actually have realized your childhood ambition of being an old man on a mountain handing out advice. So I'd like to congratulate you.
Thank you. I mean, I think sadly, like we're in a cultural moment where that's like 99% of what people are doing. Like everyone is free with the advice. And so I don't think advice is as cherished as it was from I'm guessing, New Yorker cartoon where I got the idea of being an old man living at the top of a mountain giving advice. I don't know where I got that.
So I want to go back to this whole, you know, reading kind of being at the center of existence, which I think it is for both of us.
Yeah.
And in this book, toward the very beginning of it, you talk about how a favorite book can feel like an old friend, which I think is something everyone here tonight can very much relate to.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think is interesting, you then go on to say that a favorite author can be a familiar figure and a mysterious stranger all at once. And while it's true that now, like in my current form, when I read books I really like, I do feel a connection to the author in the way that you describe. When I read books when I was younger, I didn't think, even though for me too, reading and writing were always the same thing. And I wanted to be a writer. I would sit at an electric typewriter and pretend I was writing a novel. That's what I did for fun when I was very small. But even when those things were connected, when I was reading a book, I wasn't thinking about the author. I was thinking about the world of the book and its characters. And so the connection I felt for, say, when I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was the connection to Charlie Bucket and not to Roald Dahl. So,
Sure.
so I'm interested, and this is something I'm not sure about for myself either. So I kind of just want to throw it out there. Like, when and why do you think in your life as a reader, do you think you started thinking about the writers of the books you were reading and not just the world of the book and its characters?
Again, I think that was the library.
Mm-hmm.
I think that going to the children's section when I was young and saying, I liked this book, there were some really great and anonymous in terms of my knowing who they are, librarians at the West Portal branch in the San Francisco Public Library. But they gave me books, and then I would come back and say, oh, I really liked this. And then they said, oh, well, let's see what else that author, you know, intelligently for librarians said, let me help you use the tools to help yourself to find more about that. And I remember that was really fascinating for me. And then also that it began to be the puzzlement of why it takes so long to write a book. Like I got really into Zilpha Keatley-Snyder, who has, I think, kind of less of a profile now as a children's author, but she wrote The Egypt Game and The Changeling and The Headless Cupid and kind of spooky books for young people that I really admire. And, you know, I went every week for a while and checked out whatever Zilpha Keatley-Snyder I hadn't read. And then I read them all, and there was another one. And I remember thinking, like, everybody's busy, I'll give her a week. You know, and then I went back the next week and I was like, there's still not a Zilpha Keatley-Snyder, like, come on. And I remember the librarian saying, oh yeah, it might take her like a couple of years to write a book. And I was like, but I read it in a day. How, like, I understand it takes longer than a day, but like how much longer? And I certainly had my karmic comeuppance happen, because particularly with a series of unfortunate events, some young people were always like, when's the next one coming out? You know, and I would be like lying on the floor, exhausted from having written the one and toured for it. And I would just be like, just give me a second. I need a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think knowing the author was just like a way of getting more of the thing that I wanted. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know anyone who was an author until I was older. Mm-hmm. I took some writing classes, so I think there was something there that that kind of led me in a direction of thinking that was the thing you could be, thinking wrongly that was the thing you could be. But yeah, I think I knew what I had some experience of what an author was before then.
And did you ever write to any authors when you were a kid of books that you loved?
I don't think I did. There were those few authors at the library who came. The only one I remember kind of by name was Marilyn Sachs, but I'm sure they were all children's authors. But I remember that, and then I took a writing, there was a woman who taught creative writing in her house, and you made a little literary magazine with the other students in it. And so I did that, but I didn't really write to any authors. And I was also, I was confused. Finding out who was dead and who was alive actually was often like a tough task that I mean, nowadays, because as soon as you type 2 letters out, a computer is already trying to tell you facts about a person that you're not even asking about. But at the time, I remember that was tough. And I remember my middle school library had a hopelessly outdated encyclopedia that said that Agatha Christie was still alive. And I was old enough then to be like, well, you were born I don't get how that can be possible.
He's immortal.
Without figuring out that the book was old, just thinking, okay, you're really old then. I mean, more power to you, Christy, but whew, yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, I only ever wrote to one author, and I did it in high school, and I wrote to Kurt Vonnegut. And I wrote to him about how cow farts are responsible for, the methane in cow farts are a huge part of like the ozone layer, because I thought he would think that was really cool and then we could be friends.
Right.
He never wrote me back. So that was the end of that.
I guess he must have been upset by it.
Yeah, that must be it.
Yeah.
Kept him up.
I mean, one of the authors that I really was fascinated by as much the idea of the author as the books when I was young was Edward Gorey, of course. Mm-hmm. And when the first 2 volumes in Unfortunate Events were published, I sent them to Edward Gorey with this note that I felt like I worked hard on the note, because the note was like, I love your work so much, and I'm sorry that I've stolen so aggressively from it, and I hope we're cool, man. And shortly after I sent the note, he died. So
it's your fault, is basically what you have just confessed to.
I do picture that he looked at it and he was like, summon my solicitor, this is an outrage, and then just boom. But I don't think there's any evidence that's how it went.
I've always wondered. I blame you.
Yeah.
So you write that this is a book of philosophy. And in the book, you define philosophy as thinking about things and trying to figure them out, which is definitely true in this book, since you're trying to get to the bottom of a disturbing note that you discover as you're eating. Yeah. But I would counter by saying that often a book of philosophy isn't just about the process of trying to figure things out. It has a particular viewpoint that is trying to get across. Like I'm thinking about, how Sartre, he had decided that we all create our own meaning for ourselves in life rather than having meaning handed down to us. And so I'm curious if you think whether this book has a particular philosophy that it's getting across, or is it really more just a book of open exploration and observation and thought?
I think that the philosophical statement of the book is one about bewilderment, because I think of this book as being about bewilderment. And I think that maybe the big idea of the book is that when you're confused, when you don't know what's going on, is that's actually the closest grasp you're going to have on the world, and that it is certainty and other forms of feeling sure-footed in your journey that are danger signs, and that actually when you're feeling bewildered, when you're feeling confused, that this is the essence of what it is that you are thinking about. Mm-hmm. Then only then do you really have a grip on what you're doing.
And I think it's a very short leap from what you're describing as bewilderment as just sort of wonderment, which I think brings us back to what you were saying at the very beginning about how, as when we're small, when we're kids, we look at everything and it is all in wonderment and bewilderment. Like, what is this thing? I have questions about this thing. And then I think the danger of adulthood, maturity, getting older, is kind of having an era, I know this thing, so I don't need to look at it anymore. I don't need to consider this. I don't need to think about this. And so the act of bewilderment is sort of an artistic manifesto. Like it's the way to remain curious, perhaps, about the world and to continue being able to see new things and make new things.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think I have to go and think about that at length, what you've just said about whether it's the same as wonderment. But all it reminds me of is there's a Laurie Anderson monologue / song, whatever you would want to call it, from Laurie Anderson, and she talks about grieving and walking around New York and hearing a voice in her head that says, "Do you want to go home?" And then she says to herself, "I am home." And I guess the reminder that we're confused about other people, and yet we are people. We're confused about the earth, and yet we're on the earth. That everything that we're confused about is in fact something that we're attached to. That nothing human is foreign to us in some basic way, and how foreign that is to think about. And I don't know, it's hard to talk about without sounding extremely Californian, which I feel even more self-conscious of under the umbrella of a Brooklyn bookstore. But I also remember just how confusing certain parts of childhood were, and that was called back when I was a parent. I mean, I still am a parent, but when I was a parent of a small child, so that there was a constant pop quiz on the world, right? When children reach the age of asking what is on their minds before they reach the age of kind of deciding to filter that, it's constant. You're having to explain the world, and you realize how little explanation you have. I remember that my son, like many young boys, loved thinking about automobiles, and that there was a car out on our street with a boot from like not paying a ticket. And he was so fascinated by that, but he was also fascinated by the word boot, which he knew as a thing. And here's a boot on a car, which looks nothing like a boot. And also that it was because they didn't pay for a ticket, which he knew as a thing to like go to the zoo or something. So it became this world of like, yeah, if you park near a fire hydrant, they're going to give you like that piece of paper that you get in order to go to the zoo. And if you don't pay for it, they're going to put on the tire of your car that thing that you have to wear when it's raining. And I could see that he was trying to catch up with what this was. And that as I was explaining it to him, I thought, yeah, why is it again we have the same word for totally different things? Yep. And you know, feeling slowly my grip on the situation, where I was like, yes, I can explain this very simple thing that's happening. And by the end of it, I was like, I don't know, man, I don't know what's happening. And that, but it reminded me of when I was a child sometimes, and I would think, I wonder about this. And then I would think, that reminds me of everything that I'm wondering about. And I would suddenly feel that dizziness, that deep dizziness of not knowing where you are.
Totally. Do you know, I'm not going to remember the name of the author. There was like 3 or 4 books written and illustrated. I think it was by someone who was like in the Munsters or the Addams Family. And he wrote these books that were illustrate exactly that, like things that made no sense. Like my aunt is feeling a little hoarse. And then right. Like, you know, there'd be a picture of a woman who's like touching a small horse. And then like it rained and there's this hovering queen and the rain going down. Do you know what I'm talking about, or no?
I don't. I mean, it's a familiar form to me, but I'm not thinking of any specific book.
Okay. Yeah. They were really cool, and they were about exactly that. So I have one more question for you.
Okay.
People are beginning to fill out questions in the question and answer thing, which is awesome. I wildly encourage all of you, anyone who has a question, do it, because we're going to go to you guys next. And I have to admit, my last question is not so much a question as a confession. And I'm a little reluctant to make it because it may mean we won't be able to be friends anymore, because it concerns eggs. And in your book, you express very strong feelings about eggs. And you say—
I think eggs are really important. And I think their preparation is really important.
Yeah, and you're suspicious of people who don't like them. But here's the thing. I think yolks are really disgusting. And I've tried to like the yolk, because I admire the egg so deeply as an object. It really is one of the most perfect objects on the planet. And I like it aesthetically. I like the idea of it. I like playing with them, but I don't like the way yolks taste. And the idea when you've got a fried egg or a poached egg and then it gets all runny and the yellow goes, it's just, so, and you know, every 2 years I make myself eat a poached egg because I want to like it. And I just keep not liking it. And so I've never really been able to abide them, which is why my favorite egg preparation is the one that you do not mention in your book, which is the omelet. So my final—
I mentioned the omelet a little bit. I talk about how— scrambled eggs are terrible.
Yes.
And that, in fact, everyone kind of knows they're terrible. And that's why there's so many dishes that put things with scrambled eggs.
Yes.
Which I don't think I use the word omelet, but I include omelet under that umbrella. I include the omelet or scramble, or when you're cooking at home, the omelet that like becomes a scramble. Mm-hmm. When you're like, oh, I didn't get it right, so maybe I'll just mix it up and pretend I meant scramble all along.
Right.
But I always think that's funny. It's like, sure, if you add enough things to these eggs, you'll like these scrambled eggs. Like, ew, scrambled eggs are gross. And they're like, yeah, well, try it with criminy mushrooms. And I think like, okay, but you know what else is good? Criminy mushrooms. Why don't we try those with criminy mushrooms? Yeah. So, but you don't like, well, now I'm that annoying friend, right? Like when you have a friend who doesn't like Tom Waits and you're like, but have you tried the Blue Valentines album? And the friend is like, I told you I don't like Tom Waits, stop doing this. And that I'm gonna be that guy. I'm gonna come over to your house and be like, when I make you an egg, you're gonna love it.
I invite you. I would love to love eggs. It's like, it really is a regret of mine that I, even before reading your, you know, your strong judgment, if you can turn.
But there's also things you can do with only the white of the egg.
Yeah, but that's
you don't
not
have to eat the yolk.
But that's not the, I mean, I understand, but I feel like that's cheating, you know?
I would agree. I was just trying to make you feel better. Okay. I was gonna secretly think you were a cheater. I would be like, yeah, no, sure, just eat the whites. No one minds.
Right. Yeah. Nah, it doesn't work. No. I appreciate it, but nah, I don't buy it. And on that note, let's go to the questions that you guys may have. And we've got a bunch piling up, which is great. And other people actually in the chat, yeah, Amelia Bedelia and Send Dax a Hole is to Dig. Like, yes, that's exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about. Like, and I love the books that kind of, and I guess the children's books that, I think one of the things that makes children's books work, which I think is also why, you know, you're able to write books, is like, even though you say you don't remember what it was like to be as a very small child, because you're still allowing yourself to be bewildered and you're still kind of observing things, a commonality is kind of still preserved, so that when you write and when Sendak writes and when, you know, the author of Amelia Bedelia writes, it's writing in a way that connects because they haven't closed themselves off. And so I think that's a big part of making writing that works.
Yeah, I think you flatter us all by saying that they haven't closed themselves off, like, because I think it's actually that for whatever reason, it just hasn't happened. I mean, I continue to be bewildered, not because I will myself to be bewildered every day, but just because I feel bewildered.
All right, so I'm gonna go to questions here. And Kim wants to know how you felt when you first saw Margot's illustrations.
Oh, I felt very excited. So yeah, the illustrations for Poison for Breakfast are by Margot Kent, an illustrator with whom I had never worked before. And they have this lovely, I'm so tempted to hold the book up to the screen, but I've been in the audience on enough of these to know that that's everyone's least favorite part of a Zoom book event. And so, but the illustrations have a lovely kind of handmade quality to them that seem just perfect for this kind of book that is about writing things down on scraps of paper. And yeah, so I felt very excited right away. And oftentimes with an illustrator, they kind of turn in a bunch of different ideas for what they're going to do. And you think, oh, that's not right, but maybe we can work over here. And obviously I need to tell this person a little more. And in Kent's case, they would just come out and they would be pretty much brilliant and dead on every time.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. And is this the case where, so was there any communication? Like, did you and her talk about it, or did she just kind of do stuff? And...
No, I wouldn't let her talk. That just doesn't seem fair to me. No, we didn't have, all communication was through the publisher, which is often how it goes when the publisher finds the illustrator, which is what they did. But I've also had much closer relationships with illustrators, including my charming wife, which is about as close as you can get, really. She and I have collaborated too. And I would say that there's no ironclad rule. Sometimes negotiated communication is easier, and sometimes that's more difficult. And sometimes being close to someone is easier, and sometimes that's more difficult. And so I don't know, and I try to let such collaborations find their path as much as they can. Mm-hmm. And in this case, for kind of boring logistical reasons, the book was in a much more complete state when it was given to the illustrator. Sometimes things are still in flux when you give it to an illustrator, and this time it was just about everything was nailed down, just about every sentence. And so that was an interesting challenge, I'm sure, for the illustrator as well, but it's worked out so splendidly. I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, they're lovely. Deborah says that she saw on Instagram that you said something about how you were told this book could never happen. Why was that, and what changed?
The short answer, which maybe will be a longer answer in some other forum sometime, is that we're kind of in a wacky conservative period for children's publishing, frankly. And so a book that, as you say, is more contemplative, and also a book that in many ways lays out some complicated social issues to think about at your leisure, was a book that was nerve-wracking for some children's publishers. And the only thing that happened is that we were waiting for people who were excited by it to publish it, and here they are. So yeah, it's not much of it. It's not a sad story or anything, but I knew when I was writing the book that it was strange, and I wasn't sure who would be up for it. And so it means a lot to me that that people are. It was written, sorry, this is a little bit of a sidestep, but it was written during this unexpected window of time. I don't know if you've ever had this, but it was really a blessing. It was a time, it was a summer, and I had this vague idea for a book in my head, but I thought my entire summer was going to be on the set of Netflix's adaptation of a series of unfortunate events, because that was the shape of the gig that I had with them then. And then, as often happens with large entertainment conglomerates and single artists, they were like, why don't you go away for a little bit? And so they kind of pushed me out. And so suddenly I was free. And not only was I free, but kind of no one knew that I was free, and no one was expecting a book from me. And so I just started going to the library every day and working on this book, not even knowing if it could succeed as a book, but just knowing that I wanted to try it. And that was delicious for me. But I think it also made me tender that when some people said, like, I don't think this is a book, I was like, ooh, but I thought it might not be a book. No, I'm nervous. But it is a book. Look.
Yeah, you got the proof right there.
Yeah.
Algo Rosa wants to know, what are some of your favorite philosophy books apart from Judith Martin?
Oh, wow. She really knows the way to my heart, or whoever. I shouldn't make a gender assumption. That person always knows the way to my heart. Books of philosophy. It's true that I'm a big fan of Judith Martin, known to the world as Miss Manners. I think her books are unexamined marvels. I don't know if you've read any Miss Manners. Like, I'm sure you've read her here and there in the paper or whatever, but her books about manners are really about, or etiquette more properly, are really about figuring out how to maneuver in a world that is often confusing and requires different codes to get through. And I think her books are very powerful, and I turn to often when I'm confused in my interactions with other people. I'm trying to think of what other books of philosophy I really dig. I'm reading a couple of books of philosophy now for another project. One is Animal by Dorothea Lasky. I don't know if you'd call it a book of philosophy, but she's a poet, and it's kind of articles about her craft of poetry, which is really cool. And then there's this book that's long out of print, and it's called Hieroglyphics, and it's by Arthur Machen. Do you know him? Yeah, he was like the kind of purpley in prose and very much in touch with the other world, but he's written this book about reading called Hieroglyphics, which is like a great title for thinking about reading. Yeah. And so that's been a wonderful book of, I guess I would say, philosophy. I mean, look at it properly, every book is a book of philosophy. I will say, for people who haven't read Goldberg's latest novel, Picture This, that I would say that's about, I mean, that's a book of philosophy about, I would say, kind of motherhood and womanhood and art making and the march of time and thinking about where you fit in there. It's not a book of philosophy in that it is not written in obtuse abstraction, right, but it's philosophical.
But I mean, actually, I remember, like, when did you, because I actually, so in terms of realizing, I guess in terms of your, I'm going to go back to your reading life. Was there a point in your reading life where all of a sudden you realized that when you make stuff up, that a book of fiction isn't just about the story? Like, that there are all these other things going on? I guess because I remember I was in high school and I read Milan Kundera for the first time, and I read An Unbearable Lightness of Being, and the philosophy is just right there. Like, I mean, it's not, he just goes for it, and I was shocked and so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, you can do that when you tell a story? So did you have—
It's a really marvelous feeling, I think, particularly when you're young or starting out thinking about writing, that feeling of like, I didn't know you could do that. And then being reminded, you can do anything.
Yeah.
It's words on a piece of paper. Like, but I do love that thing of like, I didn't know you could, that's great. Like, there's someone like, you know, written the head of literature to make sure that this is allowed. Yeah. And was there a time, I'm trying to think, I mean, that era, like I think we're about the same age, but the like Milan Kundera high school era was definitely big for me. Mm-hmm. Who did I read then? It's when I discovered Paul Auster and Toni Morrison. Mm-hmm. And I mean, yeah, so I don't know if there was but definitely all those things that was like, I didn't know you could do that. Yeah. I read The Master and Margarita. I bought this paperback copy of The Master and Margarita that had the cover torn off, as they do with like mass market paperbacks. And so I had no author, I had no other information. I actually bought it because it sounded dirty, The Master and Margarita. You know, I was like, oh, this is gonna be hot. And then, you know, 9 pages in, when like a cat starts killing people, I just was like, I do not know where I am. I don't know what's going to happen. That was really exciting.
Oh, and thank you to Carol for so Fred Gwynn is the guy who did those books I was talking about. He has one called A Little Pigeon Toad and Pigeon, you know, the animals, The King Who Reigned, A Chocolate Mousse for Dinner. They're all really.
Yeah, I think Lisa Brown, My Charming Wife, knows of these books.
I would not doubt it. Let's see if we've got other lovely questions from our readers. Let's see. An anonymous attendee wishes to know, how do you recommend people learn to cook? And yeah, how do you recommend people learn to cook?
I recommend people learn to cook? Gosh, that's tough. I don't know. I learned to cook by necessity, pretty much. My first year in college, I lived in a dorm and the food was terrible, of course, blah, blah. And then after that, I rented a house with friends and then we just had to cook every night. And we all knew how to cook like half a thing and we kind of worked on it from there. And then after college, my wife had a real job and I only had like half a job. And so I was trying to write a novel in the afternoons, and I knew that the key to a successful relationship, having failed at it several times previously, was not for my girlfriend to come home from her real job and take off like the real shoes she had to wear and find her boyfriend being like, I've worked on my novel all afternoon, what's for dinner? I knew that was not how to conduct a successful heterosexual relationship or any kind of sexual relationship. And so I just started figuring out how to cook. I looked it up a little bit and things like that. And then as it became more important to me, I cook a lot now, but it definitely had kind of being broke at its heart. Yeah. We didn't have a lot of money. We lived in New York and we used to have dinner parties and people were like, no one has dinner parties in New York. And we were like, we know, because this costs $16, what we're doing right now, to make you this salad, you know, and these beans and things like that. And if we went out, it was going to cost $160, like before we walked into the place. The first drink cost $16 and we didn't have any money. And so what am I saying then? Poverty. I recommend poverty. No, I don't know. Yeah, you have to, you know, you have to do it badly a lot. But the nice thing about cooking is that people are so grateful to have a meal. Yeah. So if you cook something, they're not going to say, this isn't the best pasta I've ever had. They're going to say, oh, thank you for making me pasta.
Unless they're your child, in which case, yeah, they'll tell you that it's
well, but hopefully by then you have the attitude that you can carry off in dinner parties too, which is you'll eat what I fix, yeah. Right. I just had kind of one of my first post-pandemic dinner parties, and while I was cooking, I had this little thing of like, oh, you haven't cooked this dish in a while, maybe it won't go well. And I was like, what are they gonna? They're in my house. What are they gonna do? Throw things at me? They'll eat it.
Dan wants to know, will the Gothic Archies compose music for the Poison for Breakfast audiobook, and do they have secret songs for wrong questions?
Well, it depends what you mean by secret. There was a song for all the wrong questions. There were some more songs that then didn't go forward for boring reasons. There's not a song for Poison for Breakfast, although I would love Mr. Merritt to write a song for Poison for Breakfast, and I've tried to guilt him into it a couple of times. There is, for people who are waiting on tenterhooks about the audiobook, the news that the audiobook is narrated by Patrick Warburton, who played Lemony Snicket in the Netflix series, for those of you who
cool.
enjoy his voice, which I do. Yeah.
Did you say that's who you wanted, or was that the decision to made somewhere else?
Yeah, we talked about it, and then it's always kind of assumed that I know all these actors when in fact there's usually like a couple of meetings, but actually he and I hung out a couple of times, and so I felt comfortable contacting him, particularly because it was a pandemic and all the actors I know were desperate to do anything during a pandemic, so I felt like I had him. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You'll have to go in and record this for me, I said.
So we've got time for maybe a couple more. So you've been holding out. Now is your moment, because soon the door of opportunity will shut.
That's forever. Right. Don't come visit me at home if you think of your question too late.
But the one, so of course there's the question, do you have any plans for more Snicket books?
I do have plans for more Snicket books. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. There's also right now a movement afoot to get Lemony Snicket on the stage, which is something that I'm working on. So contrary to what you might assume from Poison for Breakfast, Lemony Snicket himself is not dead.
Cool. Anonymous says that they always had the feeling that Lemony Snicket was British. Is that the case?
Yeah, I get that a lot. British or dead? Yeah. No, I never thought he was British, but the books take place, I think, in a world that is, kind of fetishized by literature. And I think that particularly if you're an American, that tends to have some kind of British lilt to it. But no, I never really particularly pictured him as British. When the first books were published, I got this curious note from the Charles Dickens Society that asked if I would come lecture about how my my vast knowledge of London, as Dickens had a vast knowledge of London, fed into the books. And I had to say, like, I don't know a thing about London. You guys drive on the other side there, right? That's all I know about London. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting the assumptions people make. Sometimes reading.
Yeah, and also I think the American projection, like the American literary projection onto Britain, is particularly goofy, and it's particularly goofy if you go to England to go and talk about your work, where that projection is regarded as particularly odd.
Right. Deborah has a question about writing.
Okay.
She wants to know, as a writer, how do you know when your book is done? I keep thinking I'm done, and then I keep revising. I've completed, in quotes, 12 books, but I still don't know how to know when I'm done. I worry this can go on forever.
Yeah, it can. I don't know. I mean, she has almost as much experience that she's completed 12 books, then she completely knows that it's going to go on and on and on and on and on. Yeah, I don't know. The only thing I think is when, I guess it's a little bit of a Theseus' ship problem, to return to philosophy, that if I start to think maybe this whole book should be something else entirely, then I begin to think, no, that's a different book. If I start to really, it starts to be a different book, then I think to myself, you are reaching the end of this. It is the best that you can do, which is the phrase that I say to myself a lot. Yeah. But I know you've had trouble finishing, right? You don't know when it's done.
Well, I think in the early days, when I was a child, right. I used to have, I did encounter that problem in the past. I think for me, a book is done when I give it to someone else to read. What they tell me they got out of it is what I was hoping someone would get out of it. And when when none of the questions they're asking are foundational to understanding the story. Like when I kind of have maybe a top 5, top 10 list of the things that 150% of readers absolutely need to understand so that I know the story is working. And so it may be done when I give it to a reader, and they get all that stuff. And then I know that sort of my intentions are being communicated as best as possible.
And do you feel a real closure with that?
Closure.
Because I think I often feel, in the same way that you return to an argument and in your imagination and you fashion it so you win this time because you've now thought of the perfect thing to say, and the argument that's like long past and water under the bridge, no one remembers but you. Mm-hmm. I think I also do that sometimes with my books, so I'm not actually changing anything. but I'll say, oh, that would have been nice. So I don't know. Yeah, you have my sympathies more than I have advice for you, Deborah.
And I guess the one we're going to close out on is Kristen wants to know, were there any parts of Poison for Breakfast that were removed from or added between submitting it to the publisher and the final printed version?
Some tiny little things, for sure. I mean, tiny little things, but I'm not really in the sense that nothing that anyone would notice but me, I think. And part of that was because there's so many ideas in this book, and getting them all sorted was kind of the main project of writing the book. So by the time it felt organized in a way that made sense to me, I was already kind of way down that path. And in terms of publishing it, I mean, I think, as I said, I just I didn't want to partner with people who were afraid of anything. So it was great to work with the good people at Norton who were like, I like this. And if other people are upset, that's how life goes sometimes.
And would you say that that characterizes your relationship with editors in general, like with other books, other Snicket books, or just other of your works? Do you tend to have a kind of hands-on, you know, elbow-deep relationship working in the tub with an editor, or is it more of just when you bring it to them, it's pretty much a done deal?
I've gone both ways. It really depends on the book. Sometimes I'm handing it over to someone to say, maybe you can help me make sense of this. I also have some really good writer friends in my life, including the charming Elise Brown, who I believe I've mentioned her before. And she's my first reader, and a very fierce reader. And the kind of reader I really like, because she's a big reader, obviously, of literature and a lover of literature, but she's kind of less pretentious about it, for lack of a better word. So she's, you know, I'll be like, I have a grand scheme going that echoes the schemes of other writers. And she's like, this part's boring. I don't like this part. And which is something that I need to hear. And then I always like to shout him out because he shouts me a lot, but Andrew Sean Greer and I are good friends and exchange manuscripts a lot. So, so I have some kind of platonic editors before I have professional editors. So yeah, but it really depends on the book.
And I think that brings us to the end of our charming hour and your book.
Well, it's always nice to hang with you, Goldberg.
Absolutely.
And I hope the rest of you scattered around wherever you are, who are like slicing stuff for dinner, or having another drink, or like paying bills, or all the other multitasks that we all do now while people are talking. I hope that you also are having a lovely time, because I had a lovely time.
Yeah. And go buy this book and buy it from Powerhouse.
Yes, please.
You can do it from anywhere, but you should do it from Powerhouse, because
yeah, I should say that I have a narrow set of spiritual beliefs. I don't have a lot of spiritual beliefs, but one of them is that if you enter an independent bookstore and you leave without purchasing something, you are committing a sin. And that extends to the virtual world. There are institutions that, you know, that are so generous with their time and space when time and space are so dear. And Powerhouse is very nice to provide the umbrella under which Goldberg and I can talk. And if you joined us under this umbrella and you leave without purchasing something, you're committing a sin.
All right.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you for the wonderful discussion, Daniel, Mila, Lemony, and everyone who has questions. If anybody missed any of the event, I know there's some questions out here about this. It will be on YouTube later if you want to rewatch or share, or if you missed any of it. And yeah, please buy a book. They'll have the beautiful, amazing book plate.
Yeah, I sat at home watching horror movies and signing those, so.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, good night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.